Thank you. Good afternoon. Today's the 27th of July 2023 and it's the Ordinary Council meeting and it's 1:33 p.m. in the afternoon. I'll call for attendance at commencement. I can see everyone here except for Councillor Johnnick, and I note that Councillor Johnnick is online and has requested attendance. So Councillor Nicole Johnnick has requested attendance at the Council Ordinary meeting today via audio link. So in accordance with section 254K of the Local Government Regulations of 2012 and 8.6.1 of Council's Meeting Procedures Policy, I move that Councillor Johnnick be permitted to participate in the meeting via an audio link. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Ireland. I'll just check, Councillor Johnnick, that you're there.
Good afternoon.
Wonderful. Any discussion? I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And it's unanimous in the room. Welcome, Councillor Johnnick. I'll now ask for Councillor Kunzelman to give an acknowledgement of country.
Ipswich City Council respectfully acknowledges the previous occupants of this country. We respect their role in their environment and has anyone got it?
My apologies, I didn't ask you beforehand.
No, that's all right, and I haven't got the right thing in front of me, which I usually do.
I'll do it then.
Yeah, thank you.
My apologies, Councillor Kunzelman.
No.
Ipswich City Council respectfully acknowledges the traditional owners as custodians of the land and waters we share. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging as the keepers of the traditions, customs, cultures and stories of proud people. Thank you. And we're very fortunate this morning to have our opening prayer by Pastor Peter Clark from the Beacon Community Baptist Church. I'll ask Pastor Peter to come forward to the lectern.
Before I pray, just like to thank Council for their support for the local churches in town. You do a great job and we do continue to pray for you regularly in your position. But let us pray as we commit this meeting. Father God, we thank you, Lord, that you are a good God. Lord, I pray for our mayor and our councillors. Lord, I pray over our city that it would flourish. Father God, as our councillors lead this meeting, Lord, I pray for wisdom, that you would give them the wisdom to navigate, Lord, leading a city in a very difficult economic climate that we live in. Lord, there are many issues in this city that are very complex. And Father God, they need your wisdom as they sit and as they meet as a council. So God, I pray that you would enable them to navigate and to make the best decisions possible for the people of Ipswich, I pray in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. And I'm judging by your jumper too, you must have prayed for our state of origin. Thank you. Thank you. I have no apologies or leave of absence. And I have a condolence motion here. I believe that Councillor Doyle has a condolence motion. So I'll hand over to Councillor Doyle, who wishes to do a condolence motion.
Thank you, Mayor. On behalf of the City of Ipswich, I move that Council express its condolences to the family of the late Mr. Stylianos Karianis. Stylianos, or Stan to us, was born in the Greek port city of Piraeus near Athens in 1933. Like over 160,000 of his compatriots last century, he left his country of birth for new opportunities in Australia, part of the wave of migration from Greece that enriched our country, culture and kitchens. Stan was married to Kathleen, who sadly passed before him, and was a proud father, grandfather and great-grandfather. He worked at the Ipswich Railway Workshops and by all accounts was a devoted and keen lawn bowler. But beyond his family and friends, the wider Ipswich community knew him as Stan the Man, or sometimes the Waving Man. For each morning, from about 7 to 9 o'clock, Stan made it his mission to stand in the immaculate garden of his home on busy Thorn Street, not far from here, to offer friendly smiles and waves to everyone who passed. The simple, authentic gesture repeated day in and day out and affected so many. Everyone waved back, bikes rung their bells, cars beeped. He was a favourite of parents and children walking to nearby Milford Street Kindy, Ipswich Central State School and Queen's Park. He was a ray of sunshine that brightened the morning of those walking to work in the CBD, including council officers heading to the old administration building on South Street. People went out of their way to make sure their way to work past Stan's house so they could share a cheerful wave or stop for a chat. Everyone, it seemed, had a story about this lovely, kind man known as Stan. He was one of my and Councillor Fechner's favourite Division 3 residents. We had the pleasure to chat with him at our mobile offices over the last few years and were touched when he invited us into his home. He was abidingly generous, thoughtful and interested in what was happening around our city. He was always an absolute gentleman and so proud of his garden. Later in life, Stan's local renown was unexpectedly heightened when he posed in his front yard for a portrait by local award-winning Ipswich photographer Jason McNamara. In the portrait, Stan stands on the concrete path beside his perfect lawn, framed by his brick home's front door arch, flanked by flowering pink geraniums in matching ornate pots, as he looks off camera, smiling and waving towards the footpath where the people passed. This fabulous image, which flawlessly captures our view of Stan each morning as we walked, rode and drove by, featured in Jason's 2022 exhibition at the Ipswich Art Gallery. 2 weeks ago, thousands saw Stan's portrait projected 5 stories tall on the old Commonwealth Bank building in the CBD as part of the Ipswich Spark Festival. I'm sure the impressive sight of Stan waving to Brisbane Street and Darcy Doyle Place brought a smile to many. Unfortunately, Stan wasn't there to see it. On the 2nd of July, Stan passed away peacefully and was farewelled at a Greek Orthodox church of St George in South Brisbane. On behalf of the city, I pass on our sincere condolences to Stan's family. Vale, to Stylianos Karianis, Stan the man, thank you for your kindness you brought to our mornings and our city.
Thank you so much, Councillor Doyle. Any other discussion? That condolence motion has been moved. Move that to the vote. Those in favour? Thank you. It's carried. Oh, sorry. Councillor Johnny? So it's unanimous in the room. How do you vote? Thank you very much, Councillor Johnny. We move on to item 6, which is tributes. There are none. We'll now move on to item 7, which is a presentation of petitions. And there is a petition and the setting up of an Islamic section in an Ipswich cemetery. And I believe it's being submitted by you, Councillor Johnny. Would you like to move that?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Ireland. I'll hand over to you, Councillor Johnny, in moving it.
Thank you, Mayor. So I am aware of a number of meetings that have already occurred with the leaders of local Islamic communities and with with council officers. There is a growing need for a segregated portion of cemeteries within our region to accommodate their religious needs. Might just ask if I could put a question on notice perhaps to the CEO for council to be updated on the discussions and progress that have happened to date with the Islamic communities in relation to this petition.
So, Councillor Johnny, at the moment the recommendation is that the petition be received and referred to the appropriate council department for investigation, report back to the relevant committee. Are you wanting to alter that?
No, actually, I will accept that.
Okay. With a request, I'm getting okay.
If I may, Chair, certainly as part of the preparation of a report back to the relevant committee, it would certainly include the issues and that have been discussed and the work of the officers, and it'll make recommendations for consideration by the council in any appropriate action. So I think that it would be included in that action.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would that be sufficient, Councillor Johnny?
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ireland, as a seconder, do you wish to speak to this? Yeah, is everyone? No? I'll open up for any discussion. No further discussion. In that case, I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the room. Councillor Johnick, I assume you're...
Affirmative.
Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. We have no presentations and deputations, no public participation and no matters of public interest. So we now move on to the declarations of interest in matters on the agenda. Are there any councillors with any conflicts of interest they'd like to declare? There's none? Okay.
Chair.
Thank you, Councillor.
In accordance with Section 150 EQ of the Local Government Act 2009, I, Councillor Jacob Madsen, inform the meeting that I have a declarable conflict of interest in item 15.6 titled Ipswich Central Redevelopment Committee Report. The nature of the declarable conflict of interest is I am a member of the executive of the Ipswich Trades Hall and Labor Day Committee, which manages and owns the Ipswich Trades Hall, which is adjacent to Council's CBD redevelopment. As a result of my conflict of interest, I will leave the meeting room while the matter is discussed and voted on.
Thank you very much, Councillor Madsen.
Thanks, Mayor. In accordance with Section 150 EQ of the Local Government Act, I, Councillor Andrew Fechner, inform the meeting that I have a declarable conflict of interest in item 15.6 entitled Report of Ipswich Central Redevelopment Committee. The nature of my declarable conflict of interest are my business interests in both A1A Events Proprietary Limited and Bar Heisenberg Proprietary Limited, both located in the top of town in Ipswich. I plan on dealing with this conflict by leaving the room while the matter is discussed and voted on.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fechner. Any other declarations of interest? No. Thank you. We now go on to item 12, which is the confirmation of minutes. And item 12.1 is the confirmation of the minutes of the ordinary meeting. So I move that the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 22nd of June 2023 be confirmed. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any errors, corrections, omissions? No, I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the room. Councillor Johnick, how do you vote?
Affirmative.
Thank you, unanimous and carried. We now move on to item 12.2, which is the confirmation of the minutes of the special meeting. And I'll move that the minutes of the special meeting held on the 22nd of June 2023 be confirmed. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any errors, corrections, omissions? No, I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the chamber. How do you vote, Councillor Johnick?
Affirmative.
Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. Item 13, there is no mayoral minute. Item 14 is the business outstanding, including conduct matters and matters lying on the table which should be dealt with. And I note at the council ordinary meeting in June that there was a question on notice asked by Councillor Sheila Ireland. There was a question that requested an update on the figures for the CBD redevelopment, including the forecasted costs and what projects are yet to be included. The CEO provided a response to Councillor Ireland yesterday, with a link to the Ipswich Central Redevelopment Committee papers on the 30th of July as a response. I'm just checking that you received those. Thank you very much. Thank you. Item 15, which is the reception and consideration of committee reports. So item 15.1 is the report of the Growth, Infrastructure and Waste Committee of the 13th of July. So I'll move that Council adopt the report of the Growth, Infrastructure and Waste Committee on the 30th of July. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Tully, thank you. Any corrections, amendments, omissions? No, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those. Okay, you would like to discuss an item? Yep, sure.
Just a question. It's in relation to item 5. Which was your original notice of motion about the short-term hotel and accommodation strategy. And perhaps I should have raised it, I didn't detect it at the meeting so much, that in the final motion being put to the council today, it's added the words non-residential to the hotel and short-term accommodation. And I just, there seems to be a dichotomy with that. If you talk about short-term accommodation, well, I'd certainly take that to mean residential, rather than for any other reason. I just wonder, am I missing something in relation to that, or what's the appropriateness of non-residential hotel and short-term accommodation?
I think we just kind of, I've put that in there to keep it very open to see what options there are.
Well, perhaps we need the words including non-residential, because the way it's worded at the moment would cut out non-residential. Or sorry, it would exclude residential because it says non-residential.
Yes, correct. Okay. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, sorry, I should have raised that, but it
You
just
could-
dawned on me when I reread it, and sometimes I think you'd appreciate, and others would you?
Yeah.
At the time, well, yeah, that seemed like reasonable, and that was an amendment, but
Yep.
could I suggest we add the words including non-residential, both in A and B? And I think that covers the focus both ways.
Okay. Okay. So what I'll do then, for this report,
Mayor?
yes? Yeah, please.
If the action plan that is desired by the council was to include residential accommodation, that would significantly expand the scope of the work, and I would have to ask your support for me to come back to you with a different date for delivery of that. It's deliberately, as I understood it, with the date of by November 2023, was for it to be focused on non-residential.
Okay. What I'll do then, just from a good meetings, I'll have a discussion. We'll move items 1 through to 4 from the GIW, then we'll move on to this to have that discussion, if that's okay. So I'll move items 1 through to 4 from the GIW meeting from the 13th of July. That council adopt the report for those items. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Tully, thank you.
I agree to that.
Any discussion on those? Nope, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the chambers. Councillor Johnnick, how do you vote?
Affirmative.
Thank you. We'll now speak on item 5, which is the notice of motion hotel and accommodation strategy, and that read that a hotel and accommodation strategy, my apologies, that a hotel and short-term accommodation non-residential action plan be prepared and presented to the council in November 2023, and B, that the action plan focus on current and future demand for short-term accommodation non-residential, Ipswich's current short-term accommodation options, accommodation types and locations to best meet demand, and planning levers and incentives that can be used to drive construction of new short-term accommodation in Ipswich. Now, I'll move that because I know we need to discuss it. Do I have someone who will second that? Thank you, Councillor Fechner. And now I think we can have a discussion on it.
Okay, thank you. Your original motion just talked about a hotel and accommodation strategy. I can't understand how you can have looking at a strategy for hotel and short-term accommodation unless it did include residential, because the hotel would normally have elements of residential of one nature, and short-term accommodation I assume refers to people, which means residential involvement. So I guess I'm a bit confused. I'll say again, I'm sorry, but perhaps we should have explored that a little bit better at the committee meeting.
I think Councillor would like to speak.
Yeah, well, no, I agree with Councillor Tully. Non-residential accommodation usually refers to real estate that's not a dwelling. So I understand why you use the term non-residential. You are sort of more aimed at, I guess, commercial, short stay, holiday. So I think the intent is quite clear. I think we just remove the words in brackets non-residential, because I don't think it's necessary, and I don't think, if we look at the true intent, that it's going to widen the scope of work required by the organisation.
I'm just going by what the CEO said. I think that if we remove that, it would change the scope and it would take additional time.
No, that was if we included the words including non-residential. I thought the CEO felt that by doing that it was widening the scope. If we just remove the brackets with, it's not necessary. I think general terms of short-term accommodation, hotel, speak for themselves.
Yes, they're not. It's not about someone. It's a living where they're going to be living there permanently.
So if I can, Thank you, Chair. The thinking was that including the bracketed, including non-residential was appropriate, as it did make it abundantly clear that it wasn't residential. But if short-term, it depends on your definition of short-term, I guess, and given this is, it's a motion, it doesn't go into the detail beyond the words that are there. So if the council determines that short-term indeed is not rental accommodation, for example, that depending again on your definition of short-term, what's short-term, I guess, is the question.
My intent as the mover was to look at not that long-term rental residential accommodation. It was meant to be, how do we get more, what planning levers do we have and what mechanisms and incentives can we do to get hotels and short-term accommodation? So not, like I said, renting or that long-term. So I think that captures that. That's,
Yeah. So,
Yeah, I agree with that.
can you put your microphone on? Thank you.
Sorry, I agree with that. It's just that the use of accommodation usually has the connection of some sort of residential being short-term, and we should make that clear, that we're not excluding any.
Do you have a suggested
non-residential opens
wording?
you up for commercial, schools, a whole heap of things that shouldn't be in scope, is just my view.
Yeah, that's the other side of the coin, yeah.
Do you have a suggested other wordings that you think might be more elegant?
If we this is just for consideration. If we got rid of everything in brackets and just put in the body of the thing, hotel and short-term accommodation, I think that probably, and get rid of everything in the brackets.
Hotel and short-term accommodation speaks for itself, in my view.
Yeah, I think that covers it.
Taking the guidance on the live stream as record, yes, thank you. It's just for clarity's sake. I just don't want to not meet council's expectations in coming back in this relatively short time frame with an action plan.
Yeah, so
Okay, so in that case, I guess as the mover and the seconder will remove the non-residential in brackets?
Yes,
As suggested by Councillor Tully?
in A and B, and I think that
In A and
would
B.
cover and would clearly make the focus the accommodation by people in short-term accommodation.
not animals.
Yeah.
That's right.
I think I think we made that clear. I think the Deputy Mayor would like to
At the risk of extending the conversation further, would it more define it by saying short-term / overnight accommodation?
I'd prefer to keep it the way it is, if that's okay. I guess.
That covers one night, and number two, we wouldn't
Yeah.
do not
If you're staying
we want multiple
stay
nights.
for
We don't
5
just want one
nights,
night stays.
you book 5 night stays.
Well, that's certainly short-term conversation.
Yeah, short-term / overnight stay accommodation.
Okay, thank you. I guess the advice is we'll leave it at short term. So I think as a mover and the seconder, we've both agreed to remove that non-residential in A and B. Oh, okay, in that particular, sorry, in that motion, I guess coming to today. My apologies. Yes, you are, sorry. You are, sorry. So seconder, Councillor Fechner, do you agree to take out non-residential in A and B?
I agree, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fechner. I'll now open that up for any further discussion. No, but thank you very much. I thought that was a very good discussion. Thank you, Councillor Tully.
Your invitation to make a very brief comment, I think this is a tremendous initiative by the Ipswich City Council. It is certainly almost a scourge on our society that it's got to a point around Australia where long-term accommodation is needed, but certainly short-term for a lot of people as well. And I think if we can explore some of the options which are available to us to facilitate, if not implement ourselves, but to facilitate a strategy that would improve the shortage of accommodation in our city, that is a really valuable thing for our community to achieve.
Thank you, Councillor Tully. If there's nothing else, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the chambers. Councillor Johnnick, how do you vote?
Affirmative.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to item 15.2, which is the Governance and Transparency Committee of the 30th of July, and I'll hand over the chair of that committee to see how we'd like to manage that report.
I move that the minutes of the Governance and Transparency Committee held on 8 June 2023 be confirmed.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Ireland. Any discussion on those minutes?
It's not the minutes that we're confirming. I think
Sorry.
we're looking to adopt the report.
My apologies, yes. I was looking at item 1, that council adopt the report of the Governance and Transparency Committee of the 13th of July. Sorry. It is written twice. My apologies. You're moving that, Councillor Madsen? Yep. And Councillor Island's happy to second. I can see she was raising her hand. Thank you. Any discussion or any... You wish to speak to it, Councillor Madsen? Nope. If there's nothing, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the chambers. How do you vote, Councillor Johnny?
Affirmative.
Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. We'll now move on to item 15.3, which is the report of the Community, Culture, Arts and Sports Committee of the 13th of July. And the recommendation is that Council adopt the report of the Community, Culture, Arts and Sports Committee of the 13th of July 2023. And I'll hand over to the chair of that committee to see how we'd like that report managed.
Yeah, I'd like to move that recommendation. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Kunzelman. Any discussion?
Just briefly, and to acknowledge for the benefit of the entire council, recommending that the next date of the Ipswich show holiday is the 17th of May 2024. So make sure you diarise that. Secondly, of note, we discussed a white paper that had been presented to council from the Obesity Advisory Group, and that has a series of recommendations to the local government that we resolved at committee that the local government, as in us, we would consider those recommendations in the implementation of the active Ipswich strategy. It was a timely report. We did have the benefit of having representatives from Westmoreton Health in the meeting, in the committee meeting, just by chance. They were actually coming to present to the Economic and Industry Development Committee. So the newly appointed CEO, Hannah Block, was here, and she was pretty excited to hear that the local government were actually discussing those health concerns that we have in our community. You know, we did have lots of discussion around the fact that it's not generally seen as the core business of councils to kind of invest in health in any significant way, but we acknowledged that we as community leaders have a part to play, particularly in that education and advocacy space, which has kind of fueled the flame. And later today we'll be discussing the LGAQ motions, and I've got a little bit of a motion to put forward to the council, which is kind of, you know, directly acting on some of the recommendations here regarding our strong advocacy for better health outcomes in region. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion? No, thank you very much. Very much looking forward to the show. I'll put that matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous. Sorry, it's unanimous in the chamber. How do you vote, Councillor Johnnick?
Affirmative.
Thank you very much. It's unanimous in the chamber. We'll now move on to item 15.4, which is the report of the Economic and Industry Development Committee. And the recommendation is that Council adopt the report of the Economic and Industry Development Committee of the 30th of July 2023. I'll hand over to the Deputy Chair of that committee to see how we'd like that report managed.
Just happy to move that, as is the recommendation.
Thank you very much. We'll have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Kunzelman. Any discussion? Yes, thank you.
Just wanted to take the opportunity before the full council to again reiterate that I think tourism and city events is a matter for economic and industry development. I'll respect your decision this morning, but my protestations, maybe they be heard.
Thank you, Councillor Madsen. Any other discussion? Put the matter to the vote.
Yes, if I may.
Oh, yes, sorry. Yes, Councillor Johnnick.
So I reiterate Councillor Madsen's comments, and I believe that the revision to the committee's terms of reference that happened late last year occurred to better align each committee's scope of services with the, I guess, the core business services of council. And the events and tourism is a key measurable for any economic development in any city. So when we did revise the terms of reference late last year, local events were not classified as tourism or destination development, I guess, and included in the Community, Culture, Arts and Sports Committee. I believe that moving the function from the Economic Development Committee will impact some of that alignment, particularly with the KPIs and data that's required. So that's just my opinion, but just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. So in the room, it is Councillor Ireland, myself, Councillor Doyle, Councillor Fechner, the Deputy Mayor and Councillor Kunzelman in the chambers. How do you vote, Councillor Johnnick?
Negative.
Negative. Anyone else against? Councillor Madsen and Councillor Johnnick against, and no one's abstaining. Thank you. The motion has been carried.
Point of order, Mayor, I'm abstaining.
You abstain. Oh, sorry, my apologies.
Okay,
Thank you. Can you correct that? That Councillor Tully abstained. Thank you. Thank you. We move on to item 15.5, which is the Environment Sustainability Committee. And the recommendation is that Council adopt the report of the Environment Sustainability Committee on the 30th, from the 30th of July 2023. I'll hand it to the chair of that committee to see how they'd like that report managed.
Thank you, Mayor. I move the recommendation as you stated.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Fechner. Any discussion on the matter? No. I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the chambers.
Affirmative.
Thank you, Councillor Johnnick. And carried. Thank you. Thank you. We're now on to item 15.6, which is the report of Ipswich Central Redevelopment Committee for the 13th of July. And the recommendation is that Council adopt the report of the Ipswich Central Redevelopment Committee of the 13th of July 2023. I'll hand over to the chair of that committee to see how she would like that report managed.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm happy to move that recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Kunzelman. Any discussion? There being...
Thank you, Mayor. I just point out that I'm looking forward to a report coming to committee next month, which will give us a bit of an update on some of the, I guess, non-retail assets within the precinct, noting 143 Brisbane Street. I think we're moving to full capacity there as far as being leased, which is a really great outcome for council. I'm delighted that the assets hit that point. So, yeah, looking forward to sharing the news of that.
Great news. If there's no other discussion, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the chamber. How do you vote, Councillor Johnnick?
Affirmative.
Thank you. Thank you. We now move on to item 16. And the first is 16.1, the CEO Organisational Performance Report for June 2023. And before we go to that, I'll ask the CEO if she has anything she'd like to update on this report.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to draw attention on page 186 of 253 of your packs and this report. We talk about engagement projects that are set to open in the month of July. And I just need to provide an update in relation to the biosecurity plan that indicated that engagement on the review of the biosecurity plan was set to open this month, in fact, in July. That isn't the case. It won't be the case. We will provide an update next month, but we are looking to engage in discussion and brief and ideally workshop with the councillors on the biosecurity plan before taking it to the next steps of consultation. So if we could come back to you with the plan on that, Mayor and Council, we'd be grateful. And we also need to correct that the project lead is in fact the Planning and Regulatory Services Department, not Asset and Infrastructure Services Department. Okay. So my apologies for the need to provide that update. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any other questions of the CEO?
I've not a question of the CEO. I would like to make a comment on item 1.
Actually, we're not at the up for discussion yet because it hasn't been moved and seconded, but does anyone have any questions of...
Okay.
No? In that case, I'll move that the CEO's Organisational Performance Report for the month of June 2023 be received and contents noted. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Doyle. Open up for discussion. Councillor Ireland.
I'd like to make a comment on item 1 on the resource recovery at Redbank Plains. I'd just like to say that the area that's being used is a credit to the previous council because the landfill happened under their term in office, and also that the plans that they had for that area are coming to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ireland. In discussion, I'd like to highlight, I think on page 183, it discusses, I guess, the end of the year, looking at the borrowing program, and I just highlight that as previously reported for the 22-23, the result of the Council's credit review with the Queensland Treasury Corp is a rating of moderate with an outlook of neutral, and this rating and outlook is consistent with the credit reviews from recent years, and the rating is reflective of Council's large and growing ratepayer base, stable financial performance and adequate cash reserves and forecast improvements in leverage metrics over the medium to long term, and that the outlook reflects the expectation there are no known foreseeable events over the next 24 months that will impact Council's capacity to meet its financial commitments. So I just want to thank the CEO and the CFO and the team for maintaining Council's financials so well.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Any other discussion? No, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. It's unanimous in the chamber. How do you vote, Councillor Johnnick?
Affirmative.
Thank you very much. We go on to item 16.2, which is the monthly financial performance report. And the recommendation is that the report on Council's financial performance for the period ending the 30th of June 2023, submitted in accordance with Section 204 of the Local Government Section Regulation 2012, be considered and noted by Council. Does anyone have any questions of Council officers on this report? No? In that case, I will move that motion. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Fechner. I'll open for any discussion. No discussion. I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the chamber. How do you vote, Councillor Johnnick?
Affirmative.
Thank you. And carried. Now, before we go to items 16.3 and 16.4, they are late reports. So, in accordance with Section 9.3.2 of the Meetings Procedures Policy, permission to hear the supplementary reports, which one is on the local government, the LGAQ conference motions, the other one is on appointment of chairpersons and deputy chairpersons of standing committees. For those to be heard, a motion needs to be moved to allow the supplementary reports to proceed. So I move that council permit the consideration of the two supplementary reports, 16.3 and 16.4. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Deputy Mayor. Any discussion? No, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the chambers. How do you vote, Councillor Jonik?
Affirmative.
Thank you. We'll now move on to those supplementary reports. 16.3 is a number of motions for the upcoming LGAQ conference. I see there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 6 of them here. I would assume you want to go through them one by one, or I'm getting a nod. Thank you very much. So we'll go through each one by one. The first one is A, that council approve motion 1 as detailed at attachment 1. And that particular one is on the community health priority in land use.
Sorry, there's an amendment to that one.
Oh, is there?
Yeah, I beg your pardon. Just check with the committee clerk that
Right.
we've received that. I'm happy to read it.
Okay. So the new motion, which did say the LGAQ calls on the state government to work with local governments and health authorities to consider land use planning controls with community health in mind, is now the LGAQ calls on the state government to commit to a regional health tour involving local governments and local health authorities to understand region-specific concerns to improve community health outcomes.
That's correct. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Tutley. I'll open it up for any discussion.
Yeah, as I foreshadowed earlier in the meeting, thank you, Mayor, the importance of local government continuing to play an advocacy role in better health outcomes in region is really important. We know that it's not necessarily in the immediate sphere of influence within local government, but as I stated, we do feel very connected to our community. So I move this and in hopes that the executive of the LGAQ accepts this motion to try and get the state government at the table. And I note that different regions have different needs. In the obesity advisory group that I'm a part of, we have members from the Scenic Rim and the Lockyer Valley who are in attendance with that, and their specific needs are quite different to ours. So I think that a regional tour to understand those needs gives a response for tailored healthcare solutions, improved community engagement, culturally appropriate services as well per region, because we know that certain areas have different demographics that need to be targeted in terms of health outcomes. So yeah, I bring this motion and I hope that my fellow councillors support sending this to the LGAQ for consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Tully, as the seconder, would you like to speak to
Just
it?
briefly, I think this motion is the twin motion of the one earlier on a broader scale for the whole of Queensland. And that's one of the issues that the Local Government Association, as we know, looks at, that the motions considered at the annual conference this year in Gladstone are of a broader scale than one issue for one council in its own area. So I think this is good, and the amended motion gives a broad strategy of moving forward in Queensland at government and local council level.
Thank you, Councillor Tully. Anyone else like to speak to it? No, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Is unanimous in the chambers. Councillor Jonik?
Affirmative.
Thank you very much. Motion B is the LJQ calls on the state government to work with local governments to integrate their existing e-planning tools with state government review and approval of local planning instruments. Do I have someone who wishes to move that? Thank you, Councillor Fechner. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Conselman. Do you wish to speak to that, Councillor Fechner?
Yeah, this is another one brought by me. Over the course of building a brand new planning scheme, we see some efficiencies that can be gained by using state planning influence across the 77 local governments. And this particular issue, just to give it a little bit of context for my fellow councillors today, really comes from the issue of mapping harmonisation and not being able to have a one-stop shop when it comes to understanding the local government overlays, the planning scheme overlays, plus the the state overlays that exist as well. So I guess this takes it one step back and looks more broadly, how can we be more strategic about how we deliver those planning outcomes across local governments in the state. I understand there was a bit of a trial that happened from about 5 to 10 years ago, where the state government did try and do this, but the monies received by those local governments at the time were actually spent on different technologies, so it further splintered any approach to try and harmonise the way that we move forward as one state. And I guess at a very basic level, it's about how do our residents get that one-stop shop for access to information when it comes to their property or properties that they're interested in.
Sorry, Councillor Cosmo, the seconder, would you like to speak to that as well?
Thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate about consistency and the difficulties that people have in understanding planning and the planning scheme. And we've heard this again just last night from a community group. So any way that we can clear some of those barriers would be useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cosmo. Open for any other discussion? Thank you,
Yes,
Deputy Mayor.
Mayor, I absolutely support this motion, and one example that community are becoming more aware of is the use of platform Development Eye. I'm so glad that Ipswich City Council has adopted that platform for our front-facing way for community to gain information. I note that Toowoomba Regional Council has adopted that platform just in the last week or so. So that is an example of, yes, using that same templating across the state, because we're all Queenslanders, but it's localised content is what is needed in there. So that is just one example for the reason why I'll definitely support this motion.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any other discussion? I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the chamber. Councillor Johnnick, how do you vote?
Affirmative.
Thank you. We're now going to recommendation C, which is the third motion, and that is that LGAQ work in partnership with Queensland Department of Transport Main Roads to review the process for the development of business cases for major transport projects, shifting the cost of doing so from the local government back to the state. And I'd like to move that. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Deputy Mayor. In speaking to that, we have seen over the years, I think when we speak, Councillor Tully, that every now and then the LGAQ do a study into the cost shifting onto local governments. And I know in particular one thing that's really hurting our budget is that we have this desperate need for infrastructure as the fastest growing council in Queensland, but we're being asked to spend millions of dollars on business cases where we actually don't have any funding or anything for that. So especially when they're federal or state government projects such as public transport and trunk infrastructure. So that's why I'm putting that forward to the LGAQ conference. Any other discussion? Thank you. Councillor Madsen.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't support this motion. Given its nature as a late report, I haven't had a great length of time to review the matter, but my understanding is that this is a convention that was actually started by the local government sector. My understanding is that local governments began to do their own business cases initially when there was no state support, and then they would work with the Infrastructure Australia Board to circumvent the state, get it classified as a national priority, and then go back to the state and expect a different outcome. So in regards to that, I don't agree with the premise of it being cost shifting when the local government industry, to my understanding, and I seek to be corrected because I haven't had a length of time to research and ask other parties what they believe. But if local governments created this convention, to me it seems remiss to call out other levels for cost shifting when perhaps it's something that the local government industry started to begin with. And I just highlight that I think in many ways other local governments which are larger than us and have larger financial resources, they do this sort of thing because when you're advocating for big spends on infrastructure, you need an evidence base. There is a set amount of money that a state or federal government can spend year to year on infrastructure. And as a matter of, reason, they're going to require an evidence base. So councils which can afford to amass that evidence base without waiting for it to arise on a state government list, a better place to do so. And given the pressing need for our city to advocate for infrastructure, I don't support a position where we wipe our hands of this. I think it limits our ability and while this doesn't bind the council to this as a behaviour moving forward just by putting this to an LGAQ meeting, I don't necessarily think it's good for us to say this here and then do otherwise elsewhere. If it's in the best interest of our city to contribute to a business case, I will support the council in contributing to a business case. One thing that I just wanted to close on is at times in our great Australian political system, people come out and make statements about what level of government is responsible for what. Well, I would challenge you on the notion that not since Federation has there actually been clear agreement from across the sphere that the division of responsibilities is fair, let alone the division of revenue streams. Our city is part of a good country, but the way all of the responsibilities are split up is an evolving passage. It's something that's organic, that requires considerable refinement. And in specific instances when it comes to transport planning, nobody knows the Ipswich transport area like Ipswich City Council. So I think, this is something where we should have skin in the game and a level of resourcing as the 17th largest council by population in Australia. So on a personal matter, I think Ipswich City Council shouldn't cease considering putting into business cases and advancing the interests of our city.
Thank you, Councillor Madsen. I think we agree on quite a few of those points, especially with how there doesn't seem to have been some type of review on who does what, where, and how it all gets funded.
Mayor, if I may, since you're referring to me, to clarify, in terms of there being a review, part of the point that I was trying to make, that perhaps I didn't elaborate at length, is that somebody can do a review at a point in time. That doesn't mean that every level of government agrees with it, and certainly that doesn't mean that that's appropriate and fit for purpose 10 years later, 5 years later, 3 weeks later. Things are constantly changing, and we have to evolve and be agile, is my view.
Thank you. That is the nature of democracy, I think. I note that in my motion I've asked for a review. I've said that the LGAQ works in partnership with TMR to review the process for development of business cases for major transport projects. So I guess I'm not asking for a hard and fast. I agree that there has to be some agility there because it may be very hard for us to get certain projects up. So I do ask for support in that and in going forward. Is there any other discussion? Yes, Councillor Tully.
I accept the comments made by both you and Councillor Madsen, but in the interest of trying to get a suitable motion to go forward, hopefully unanimously by this council, and to get it carried by the conference, which probably is much more difficult. I just wonder, and I'm just putting up a couple of possibilities, that the way it's worded is like a one-way shift without any discretion. There are some big councils in this state that will fund those costs of doing so they can get a state government sign-off, and then it can go to the Infrastructure Australia Board. Just wondering, there's two possibilities which are a little bit indecisive, but they might just soften it a little bit, that either put the word before the word shifty. Sorry, I could have said
Freudian
something.
slip.
I could have said something worse. Generally shifting, that's one option, and there might be a couple of others. Or at the end of the sentence, after the word state, if appropriate, just to give us the flexibility, because you know, Mr. Mayor, Mayor, that these conferences, the mover and seconder, yourself and myself, will be questioned over this, and we don't want it defeated because it looked as a one side size fits all. I mean, all councils in
Okay.
Queensland. So with those two suggestions, and perhaps there'd be a couple of others, just to add a word or add a couple of words, just to soften it, to say, have the flexibility that Councillor Madsen has mentioned.
I think they're good suggestions. I'm happy with that. I'll check with the seconder and I'm getting
Yes, Mayor, I concur.
Yep. I'll just check with. I'm happy to have both. I think it will work with both. Do you think generally shifting? Yep.
Thank you.
I'll just refer to Councillor Madsen if that be a better alignment, or it's obviously up to you whether to vote for it or not. But
Yeah, well, as far as I'm concerned, that's a much improved motion, but as a council, TMR could tell me what a process is. If it didn't serve the best interests of the city, I think we should politically challenge them. So I'm not too worried about the determination of a TMR report on something like this, because it doesn't have anything to do with our resourcing or objectives. We can go and get a business case if we like as well, and continue the tradition of going to the federal government, even though Infrastructure Australia will no longer accept projects which haven't been agreed to by the state. It's, you know, I guess it's one of those things where sometimes I think we forget how heavily politicised infrastructure has become in this country. And, you know, if we had a new state government next year and they weren't looking at projects in our area, I think that would drastically change things again. You know, if there was a genuine refusal to progress business cases from the state and we still needed them done, we would have to consider that and potentially go in a different direction to what a review may find. And I just suggest that you all keep that in mind.
thank you, Councillor Madsen. Any other discussion? I won't use my...
I just want to add that any way that we can word it in the best way to assist our LGAQ policy executive representative to better debate for the win is what I would agree with.
Yep. If there's another discussion, as my right of reply, I guess I'd say that I actually think a process where this is reviewed rather than means the state and the local government could actually work better. I think if the funding is coming from the state, it means that we could actually be a better collaboration. If it was supported, if it was given funding from the state. I'll put this to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. It's everyone in the chamber except for Councillor Madsen. I'll see how Councillor Johnnick votes.
Affirmative.
Affirmative?
Yep.
Thank you. Those against? Those abstaining? Thank you. Councillor Madsen's abstained. We go on to the fourth, I think D, recommendation D, which is the fourth one. And the motion is that the LJQ calls on the Queensland Government to significantly increase funding to local community providers for outreach in response to the housing crisis, recognising that housing and homelessness is the responsibility of the state. Do I have a seconder for that? Oh, thank you, Councillor Doyle. In speaking to this, we work very closely with I think here in Ipswich, the Department of Housing and Homelessness does tremendous work, and we work quite closely with them, and we'd love to see more funding for many of those local community providers that are providing those really important services, especially we know that economic times are challenging and will continue to be so for some time. I'll open up for any other discussion. No other discussion. I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's everyone in the council chamber except for Councillor Madsen. Councillor Johnnick, how do you vote?
Affirmative.
Affirmative. Those against? Those abstaining? Councillor Madsen, thank you. The next item, motion 5 there, is that LJQ make urgent representations. So I should check to see, was this one for you, Councillor Tully? Did you wish to? I'll let you read it out and speak to it.
I'll move that the LGAQ make urgent representations to the state government to ensure that the planned amendments to the Local Government Act 2009 regarding the Office of the Independent Assessor are progressed through Parliament as a matter of priority.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Ireland. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Tully?
Just very briefly, as we often say at the local government conference, the motion is self-explanatory. Golden, as they used to say in that old record from 1967.
I'll just check with the seconder. Councillor Owen, do you wish to say anything? Thank you. I guess I concur the inquiry into the council complaints system has had a lot of great things in there, and I think we're all waiting for that all those to be implemented. Yep. So
if there's nothing else, I might just add the LGAQ is actively pursuing it with the government, but the timetable is not extremely clear, but certainly before the next election. But the point has been made that there may be candidates, and there may be candidates who are sitting councillors or mayor who will consider their position based on the amendments being approved. They know exactly where they stand legislatively if those amendments are made, one way or the other.
thank you. I'll put that matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the chamber. Councillor Johnick?
Affirmative.
Thank you. It's unanimous. The sixth motion here on mobile phone at black spots. I'm not sure who moved that. Was that yourself, Councillor Tully?
Yes, I'll move that the motion to the LGAQ conference be that the LGAQ make representations to the Commonwealth Government to require all mobile phone carriers to ensure that key mobile black spots in urban and rural areas are properly addressed and resolved in a short time frame required by the Commonwealth Government.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Doyle. Do you wish to speak to that?
Yeah, this is ongoing, and it's been ongoing for much too long. As I said before, motions to the conference have to be broader than just one local government, which this one certainly is. But I continue to get complaints from people. Ipswich is, the topography of Ipswich is such that many people are in low-lying areas or for some shielded from a mobile phone tower. And we have many black spots in our own area in particular. I recall other debates at local government conferences about rural areas in particular. Some of the towns in Queensland, sure, they cover 95% of the population as they claim, but not the people driving through who don't have any connection until they're within 5 kilometres or so, or 5 kilometres past a particular town, township or major locality. So I personally think this would probably be carried overwhelmingly, but I think we need to keep hammering away because even though the carriers claim very high percentages of the population that they cover, there are still many physical areas which are not covered.
Thank you, Councillor Doyle.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to thank Councillor Tully for this motion and support his comments. Only 2 weeks ago, I heard from senior residents, a couple who, have a black spot in their own home, and to not be able to make emergency, calls in the event of an emergency is really troubling for them. And yes, while the telcos will as Councillor Tully said, say there's a very high percentage of people that do have the coverage, it's not acceptable, I think, for them to just, be able to say to residents, I'm sorry, we can't do anything more, which was the case for this couple. So I support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion?
Thank you, Mayor.
Oh, yes, sorry. Deputy Mayor?
Yes, I likewise support this motion. Recently, I've had conversations with the member for Blair with regards to current black spot funding program that requires local government to cooperate with telco carriers. I have regular communication from residents across various suburbs of Division 4 regarding their inability to connect to cellular network, particularly Pine Mountain, due to topography there. In Division 1 at Willowbank. When we attend a community meeting there with Willowbank area group residents, you're sitting in the Girl Guide hut in the meeting hall and you don't have any mobile coverage. There has been occasion where an external has attempted to present there who need internet connection to run their whatever the program is that they were going to display, and they were unable to due to lack of coverage. There's varying reason there due to proximity to the RAF base, but those black spots affect a large number of our residents and impact them very negatively. So for those reasons and more, I absolutely support this motion.
Wonderful. Councillor Kunzelman. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Just considering the couple that Councillor Doyle were talking about, there's all sorts of emergencies, and one of those might be a natural disaster, and we cannot afford to have people who cannot communicate in terms of a natural disaster. So I'm just adding that to the list of emergencies that especially elderly people might face. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kunzelman. Councillor Fickney.
Just a question to Councillor Tully through you, Mayor. Is this something that's ever come up at the LGAQ conference over the years?
Of sorts, yes, particularly in relation to the rural areas, and that the debate then covered the black spots in all areas, including urban areas. So yes, it has, but it's a long time ago now that I recall that being raised. So it will be novel for a lot of new delegates in this term of office. So it'll be an opportunity to send a message to the federal government.
Yeah, a renewed effort, and Zoomers across the LGA, thank you for the ability to scroll on Instagram wherever they feel like it.
Very important during a disaster. Social media. If there's no other discussion, I think no one spoke against it, Councillor Tully, but did you wish to say anything in reply or closing?
Thanks everyone for their comments, and I think we've overall with the last 6 motions we've had a pretty good debate, and I think we've got the structure for what we need to be able to put these motions to the a conference. But I will say people pay their taxes, they pay them for their mobile phone coverage, and in some cases they're getting next to zero coverage, and this is a big issue. It's not just in Ipswich, it's not just in Queensland, it's around Australia, and I think the Commonwealth needs to get off its backside and start implementing rules which they can enforce under federal law against mobile phone carriers, and it's about time it happened. There's been a lot of talk about it, but there hasn't been a lot of action.
Bit of passion in that voice, Councillor Tully. So I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? It's unanimous in the chambers. Councillor Johnny, how do you vote?
Affirmative.
Thank you very much. We now move on to item 16.4 concerning the appointment of chairperson and deputy chairperson for standing committees, and we have 3 recommendations here. And I'll move, and there's been, to let me upfront, sent out an email to the councillors on some expressions of interest. And so I recommend that council appoints Councillor Kate Kunzelman to be the chairperson of the Economic and Industry Development Committee, and that B, that council appoints Councillor Kate Kunzelman to be the deputy chairperson of the Ipswich Central Redevelopment Committee, and C, that the Ipswich City Council Standing Committee terms of reference be updated to reflect the membership changes. Do I have a councillor to second that? Thank you, Councillor Doyle. Any discussion? Put that to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's everyone in the chamber. You can everyone in the chambers.
Affirmative.
Except for Councillor Madsen. So, Councillor, do you say you're affirmative on that?
Yes.
Thank you. Those against? Those abstaining? And Councillor Madsen's abstaining. Thank you. Thank you. We now move on to item 17.1, which is a notice of motion from Councillor Jonik, and there has been some discussion. I think I'll hand over to Councillor Jonik or Councillor Doyle or Councillor Jonik. Are you wishing to proceed with this one or withdraw it or amend it or?
No, I wish to move the motion.
As it is?
I do note that there was amendments that were emailed from Councillor Doyle, so I'm happy to take those amendments on in the interests of this initiative going ahead.
Okay. So the current motion is that council work with community to showcase and share the strong heritage and beautiful architecture of Ipswich via placement of QR codes as part of a digital trail, collaborating existing resources such as pictures, stories of our history and community input. These QR codes on heritage buildings can be scanned by visitors as a way of sharing history information on the history and stories of Ipswich. So the amendment, which I think have been put through, shall I read it out? That council prepare and provide a report to the Growth, Infrastructure and Waste Committee in November 2023 regarding the implementation of QR codes to complement Ipswich's heritage trails published on Council's Picture Ipswich website. The report would include detail of the work that would need to be undertaken by Council to implement the QR codes, including the appropriate placement of the QR codes on buildings, information poles or other council-owned assets, in brackets, also taking into consideration several buildings on the heritage trails are privately owned and council would need the consent of respective owners, end of brackets, as well as the likely cost to council to implement QR codes across the various heritage trail locations in Ipswich. So Councillor Doyle, you're happy for that to be the motion?
Sure, yes.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Doyle. We'll open up for any discussion. Councillor Johnny?
Yes, firstly, I just wanted to thank the team from Main Street Australia who have partnered with Council since early this year, and the concept of the QR codes located on historical buildings or locations is not new, but it was raised as a recommendation from Main Street Australia during their Shopfront Savvy event that was held in May this year. So when I was speaking to Martin from Main Street Australia at that event, he spoke about visitors to our region who are interested in our history will support our small businesses naturally by dining in our restaurants or purchasing goods or services, even though from time to time the small business tenants may change. So Martin spoke about this initiative as being a fairly simple contribution that council can make to elevate the success of our local businesses. And I have spoken to a number of council officers in relation to this, like prior to posting my notice of motion, and some of the recommendations were to look at, you know, even piloting something and putting QR codes on stickers or labels that can be placed on shopfront windows, etc. And then it's an opportunity for the information we've got on Picture Ipswich and the stories that we have to be shared and even themed, depending on you know, the interests from council and council officers in the community. But you know, that's if you go back in time, it's not stagnant. It's not the buildings that were there now and then the buildings that were there. There's different stages to our history, and I think that this can open our kind of tourism sector up to something that's fairly simple to implement, and something that I think the community and definitely our small businesses would love to share in.
Thank you very much, Councillor Johnny. Councillor Doyle, as the seconder, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm excited by receiving this information report to, you know, get a handle on what we need to do to implement something like this. Earlier this year, council officers attended Maryborough's, the local government of Queensland Council Officer Heritage Conference. So Maryborough, like Ipswich, has rich history. They have their heritage trails. They also have their almost like a Hollywood Walk of Fame. They've got the plaques of their very well-known people that were instrumental in you know, contributing to Maryborough and its history. Those plaques are on the ground in tiles. So as you walk around looking at historic buildings, you also may come across an individual's name and learn about the history. I know council officers have already turned their mind to this. I do know there's some concerns around resourcing. I know from our budget that there is very, very limited funds. I also know from a resourcing point of view, our heritage branch officers are stretched with the planning scheme. So I'm just mindful that anything required to implement this will be over and above what we've got in place. So anyway, excited by, seeing what we can do to implement it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Doyle. I'll open up for any other discussion. Yes, Councillor Tully?
Thanks, Mayor. I think this is a great initiative. I think both the original motion and the amendment refer to complementing the Ipswich Heritage Trails, and I know there can be a lot of additional aspects to this, but using these QR codes on existing, I won't just say buildings, but places, probably can be done at limited cost. And the opportunity, I'm the sort of person who likes to read in situ the information about an old building and whatever. Plenty of people with the QR codes can delve a lot deeper, and I think we have the data, on our database, which would enable people to use one or even both. So I think it's a great opportunity. If we look at that and perhaps have a timeline over the next year or so, to implement part of it, and then maybe continue to extend it as that sort of technology becomes more commonly used by people in our community.
Thank you, Councillor Tully. Have any other discussion? From my perspective, I remember Councillor Doyle, when he came back from Maryborough for that local government conference on heritage, discussing the QR codes, and it's something that we have been discussing in the Ipswich Heritage Network group as well as utilising the QR code. So we know from our work there and working with council officers that I've done that there is a considerable back end. So I think this is a good report to have in the lead up to next year's budget, so we can make that informed decision. I'll just check with the CEO if November 23 is enough time, or you'll let us know if it's not.
Thank you, Chair. I believe it is. I'm just going to look for a nod or a shake. A thumbs up.
A thumbs up.
Yes,
we're
no,
good.
thank you,
Excellent.
Mayor. Thank
Wonderful.
you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion? I'll hand over to Councillor Jonik. Do you wish to sum up as the mover before we go to the vote?
Thank you, Mayor. No, just to really reiterating Councillor Doyle and Councillor Tully's comments that it can be a fantastic opportunity to, just leverage what we already have, and one of our biggest kind of tourism attractors, and it's happened everywhere. A lot of other councillors run this, so there's a QR code through Brisbane City Council for Salisbury Heritage Trail as well, and I think that everyone can get behind it. Subject obviously to resourcing, but I just think it's going to be a really positive thing for our community and for tourism for Ipswich.
Thank you. With that, I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the chamber. Councillor Jonik?
Affirmative.
Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. I'd like to give some notice that I'll be bringing forward a notice of motion at the next ordinary council meeting called Community Lapping Events. And I'll just let you know that I'll be putting forward a notice of motion for council to explore how it can support community lapping events in Ipswich Central in consultation with businesses, stakeholders and Queensland Police Service. I'll go into questions on notice. Any questions on notice? No. In that case, I'll close the meeting at 2:51. And just to say, happy birthday to Councillor Kunzelman for tomorrow. Happy birthday. Thank you.